Well, I would say this, and I'm going to let that because that's Israel's decision, but as far as I'm concerned, if all of the hostages aren't returned by Saturday at 12 o'clock, I think it's an appropriate time. I would say cancel it and all bets are off and let hell break out. I'd say they ought to be returned by 12 o'clock on Saturday, and if they're not returned, all of them, not in drips and drabs, not 2 and 1 and 3 and 4 and 2. Saturday at 12 o'clock, and after that, I would say all hell is going to break out.
You just heard it from Donald Trump himself. All hell will break out if the hostages are not returned by Saturday at 12 o'clock. Let's hear what he means.
Mr. President, when you say all hell is going to break loose, are you speaking about retaliation from
You'll
Israel?
find out,
Okay.
and they'll find out too. Hamas will find out what I mean.
Mr. President,
They're going to find out what I mean. These are sick people, and they'll find out what I mean Saturday at 12 o'clock.
These are sick people. They will find out what it means. This is his strategy to return all of the hostages safe back home. I hope it works, honestly.
Amazing. Donald Trump has just issued an ultimatum to the barbarians of Hamas that the hostages, all of them, must be released by this Saturday at 12 o'clock, or all hell will break loose. And the Israeli military will do what it needs to do, and that is to destroy Hamas. Amazing, our president, who gets it, who understands the animals, the barbarians of Hamas.
Hopefully, I hope the strategy of Donald Trump will work. Just look at the hostages. They were happy and healthy before, and now, as they have been returned, they look completely sad, completely unhealthy, and completely miserable after the horrible treatment that they had to endure for over 400 days back there under the captivity of Hamas. It is sad. All of the hostages must be returned. Oh, and there are still many hostages that needs to be returned. Hand them over. From Ilan Alexander, an American citizen, also spoke recently saying that she is looking forward to her son to be released. Let's hear her.
I'm speaking here as an American citizen to the new leader of the free world, President-elect Donald Trump. I believe in you. Idan believes in you. In the video that was shared, he spoke directly to you because he admires you and knows your power. Idan grew up in the United States, learning the value of the greatest democracy in the world. He knows you have the power to bring him home. Every proud American would love to see a plane land at JFK Airport with Idan stepping off. That moment would be the victory for America and a sign of the pride and strength for the whole nation. It would show the world that the United States can do what the United States can do. I trust you, Mr. President, to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald Trump, for bringing the hostages home. I hope it will work out in the end. Let's wait.
When it comes to the involvement of President-elect Trump's team, it has been absolutely critical in getting this deal over the line. And it's been critical because, obviously, as I stand here today, this administration's term in office will expire in 5 days. And one of the things that we have always said about this deal is that when you get from stage 1 to stage 2, that the United States, Egypt, and Qatar are the guarantors of this deal. And Egypt and Qatar will push Hamas to stay at the bargaining table and to get from stage 1 to stage 2, and the United States will push Israel to stay at the bargaining table to get from phase 1 and phase 2. So obviously those are promises we cannot make on behalf of the United States for any longer than the next 5 days. And so it's critical that all of the parties to the agreement and the other mediators see that when the United States is in the room making commitments, those are lasting commitments that extend beyond this administration into the next one. I will just say, lastly, I don't know if it's unprecedented, to have envoys from an outgoing and an incoming administration sitting at the same table negotiating a ceasefire agreement of this kind. But if it's not unprecedented, it's certainly unusual. And we, of course, thank the Trump team for working with this on this ceasefire agreement. We think it's important that they were at the table.
Exactly. Trump did an amazing job to secure a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, and I hope it continues.
I personally think that the country which should take the Gazans to its place is Qatar. First of all, Qatar is the country which is most responsible for the disaster in Gaza. They funneled money to Hamas for many years. They supported Hamas politically. They supported Hamas financially. And without Qatar, there was no such a thing like Hamas in such magnitude as we saw on October 7th, 2023. Qatar is the country which should pay the price. And the Qatari airline company has 269 airplanes, average capacity 300 passengers. They will need 1 week only to move 2 million people from Gaza to Qatar through the airport of El Arish, 50 kilometers from Gaza in Egypt. The Gazans will walk to El Arish. It's 50 kilometers. It's a one-day walk. They will do it in any way, with buses or without buses, if they know that the end of the road, Qatar is waiting for them. Now, in Qatar, as you know, Qatar hosted 2 years ago the World Cup games, soccer games. And they have many dormitories which were built in those days to host hundreds of thousands of guests, of tourists, of players, and the teams which came to play in Qatar. Qatar has the space to host most of the people of Gaza. And in Qatar, there are many hotels, very luxurious. And if there are some people who will not find a solution, the Qatari can have enough money to build for them whatever they need in almost no time. Therefore,
yeah, the only issue is that the people in Gaza do not want to leave Gaza, but hopefully they will find the voice of reason and find a great place to live outside of Gaza and then come back once it is rebuilt. It's going to be hard for Trump to cut a deal like this. We will see.
Appropriator, I've asked them to be very clear about, for example, their role funding Hamas in Gaza. They would not comply. They will not tell us what they do. Now that we start to find out some of the programs that AID has been funding, if you think about it, sex change operations in Guatemala, LGBTQ programs in Serbia,
the U.S.
this is
government
ridiculous.
does not
This is
fund
so beyond
sex
the pale.
change operations or fund Hamas. You know that, though. But you sit on...
That is not true, Margaret. I couldn't get the Secretary of State. I asked him 3 times to tell me that we were not funding Hamas through AID. He couldn't do it. And frankly, what we found is that we've been funding as American taxpayers organizations.
Do you have any evidence that the United States government is funding a terrorist group?
Certainly, the funds that have gone to UNRWA. You saw the UNRWA members who were also Hamas members doing an attack on...
UNRWA is part of the United Nations.
UNRWA is supporting terrorist groups. And if you look at what UNRWA has done, it's been so counter to our national interest. It's unbelievable that we would fund it.
Okay.
Appropriator,
yeah, I think it was a great thing to do from Donald Trump, Musk, and Doge team to cut USAID and all the funding that could go to terrorist groups such as Hamas. And it should continue. It is a very difficult issue, and some people cannot condemn what Hamas is doing, and it is sad to see. Let's watch this.
I'm just going to ask you. All right, but look, I'm just going to ask you. All right, but Dr. Barghouti, look, given you raised the issue of international law, then I'm just going to ask you one more time. You don't have to answer it. I'm going to ask you one more time. Was what Hamas did on October the 7th a crime? Yes or no?
What Hamas did in October 7th was a response and a reaction to terrible atrocities made by Israel
was it a crime?
Since 1948. It was. I don't like to be anybody to be killed. I don't like any Palestinian
was it a crime?
Or Israeli or American child to be killed.
Was it a crime?
But you have to tell me who is the war criminal.
No, I'm doing the questions.
Who killed 17,
was it a crime?
17. No, wait. 17.
Why can't you say it was a crime?
In Palestine? No, Mr. Pierce. You are following the same trend.
No,
you
no,
don't
I'm asking you a
accept
very
us, the
simple question.
Palestinians, as equal human
Very
beings.
simple question.
Why you don't accept us as equal human beings?
No, why can't you
don't
accept
say
that
we
what
have
they
rights?
did was a heinous
Why
crime?
you don't say that Netanyahu is a criminal? Did you ever in your shows ask anybody whether Netanyahu was a criminal by killing 17,000
Yes,
children?
I've asked many guests that
didn't.
question.
You didn't say he was a war criminal.
I've
You
actually
didn't
had
say
many,
that
many
International
people on the
Criminal
show
Court was
who've called him a
accusing
war
him
criminal,
of
right?
committing crimes.
But I'm asking you
Sorry.
if Hamas committed a crime on October the 7th.
Let's not dive. You're not going to divert the discussion from
You're
the
not
main
going to give me an answer,
The
are
main
you?
issue. The main issue.
He's not gonna give an answer, unfortunately. What Hamas did is definitely a crime. It is horrible. It is a terrorist organization that should be stopped, and they should immediately return all of the hostages back to their home country.
Hamas says the next release of hostages, which was part of this elaborately negotiated ceasefire agreement, is now delayed because it says Israel is violating the very terms of that underlying ceasefire agreement. Lee Kinneary is tracking the latest and comes to us from Tel Aviv.
Here in Tel Aviv, that announcement that there may be further delay in bringing those hostages home who've already been held by Hamas for nearly 500 days is unacceptable. The feeling really is that now isn't even soon enough. There simply is no time to waste after the public watched in horror over the weekend as 3 male hostages were returned, looking emaciated and weak. They were in much worse condition than hostages we'd seen in previous weeks, and the concern is rising. Hamas, however, appeared strong, parading them on stage. And now they say the suspension of these exchanges is a reaction to Israel violating terms of the ceasefire. They say Israel's delayed some Palestinians from returning to their homes. They say that there have even been some targeted with gunfire, and that essential aid has been prevented from entering the Gaza Strip. Now, this ceasefire has been fragile. Though the bombing has stopped, 3 Palestinians were shot and killed this weekend. Israel said they got too close to the border and it was a protective measure. Now, Hamas did leave a door open with this new statement, saying they deliberately gave 5 days notice before the next scheduled hostage exchange so that mediators can help correct the alleged violations, namely letting more aid into the Gaza Strip. The next exchange is scheduled for Saturday, so we've so far seen 16 hostages released in this first phase of the agreement, but there are still more than 70 hostages in Gaza, including 2 who are American citizens believed to be alive. Israel's defense minister has said Hamas's announcement in itself is a violation of the ceasefire and has instructed his military to prepare at the highest level of readiness in Gaza. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called a security cabinet meeting for Tuesday morning.
Hopefully this stops soon. Hopefully the hostages are released, hopefully the ceasefire continues, and hopefully Trump is able to cut a deal between Netanyahu, Hamas, and all of the other countries that are supporting Hamas to release the hostages and put an end to this war forever.
This is a kind of a new level now, isn't it? We've seen Hamas absolutely propagandizing the release of hostages over the last sort of few weeks. This particular one was perhaps worse than all of them, where they managed to convince one of those being released to ask where his wife and children were, knowing that they'd killed them on October the 7th, 2023. They looked awful. The Israeli government said that they wanted to make sure that all the hostages were actually alive, that they were all being treated properly, and now Hamas have suddenly turned around and gone, well, you know what, we're not going to release any more.
I think President Trump's comments should have been said nearly 500 days ago by every world leader. Instead, we've reached a point where Hamas's invasion and taking of hostages from their beds is somehow normalized, and instead of calling the exchange a ransom payment, we are using the terminology of deal making. Yeah. But it's not deal making, it's hostage taking and ransom paying. And today is Tuesday. Saturday is 4 days from now. So I would say that President Trump's comments are actually incredibly generous to Hamas to give them 4 more days to hold the 76 hostages who are being tortured, starved, chained, and held underground in dark tunnels. They have not seen the sun for nearly 500 days. It's time to release all of the hostages immediately, and I would expect and hope that every world leader would say the exact same thing so that Hamas and its patrons, Qatar, Turkey, Iran, South Africa, will get the message.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. You know, the situation is untenable, ridiculous. I can't imagine what it must be like for those poor families who are waiting to see whether not only their loved ones are going to come back to them, but they don't even know if they're alive, because Hamas have still refused to say, haven't they?
Hamas has a policy of torturing not just the hostages, but the entire Israeli public. Hamas is broadcasting every week the slow release of emaciated hostages. We saw that the 3 hostages released last Saturday were starving. We're deeply concerned about the remaining 76 hostages. What is their fate? What is their condition? And this is what Hamas is doing to the Israeli public. It's essentially saying, we have your sons. If you want your sons back, you have to release hundreds of convicted Palestinian terrorists from your prison who may take your mother and grandmother hostage next week. This is the choice we're facing. Israel has decided to pay a ransom in order to bring its people home, but it's an incredibly high price. And even then, Hamas continues to drag out the process because it knows that the hostages are its insurance. If the hostages are out of Gaza, then Hamas fears that it has nothing to stop Israel from changing the reality in Gaza without fear of harming the hostages.
Which I guess is why Benjamin Netanyahu, under a lot of criticism from some of the families, just didn't want to go into this place, you know, before now, because he didn't want to give Hamas the kind of, I guess, the ability to set the narrative and to have the initiative. But I was staggered, and I know that we talk about the BBC quite a lot, Daniel, here, and ITV, but Sky yesterday were talking about, you know, Donald Trump's idea that, you know, he wants to turn the Gaza Strip into a sort of Riviera like the North Jersey shore, and they actually said, believe it or not, in what I couldn't quite, you know, to say believe it, they actually said the military wing of Hamas has said that they're not in favour of this particular suggestion, as if they were an ordinary group of people who were worth quoting, as if they weren't anything other than terrorists, as if they weren't anything other than a military organisation, you know.
Yeah, I think it's super sad to see that people are considering Hamas like it is a normal government of the Palestinian. It is sad, honestly. They are all terrorists, they are doing horrible things, and they should be stopped.
Almost as though they were being treated like sort of Sinn Féin or something. It's incredible to me.
Yes, we've reached a reality where there seems to be a middle ground between a terrorist army that is promising to carry out more October 7th massacres until Israel is destroyed, and the state of Israel, which wants to defend itself and its people and live in peace with its neighbors. It's a situation that should have never been allowed to happen. And for President Trump to offer that Gaza could be turned into something like the Riviera, I think is something that many other peoples and countries around the world are probably wondering, why can't our country turn into the Riviera? We haven't invaded and massacred anybody. Why don't you help us turn our country into a global destination? And Trump seems to be the only one with any kind of plan. And I think if people don't like it, they need to say very clearly that the government of Gaza and the people of Gaza need to make peace with their neighbors and their claims. And on this basis, we can build a better future.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great analysis. I think hopefully Trump is the only one who has any kind of lever, any kind of firepower, any kind of leadership skills to bring an end to all of these atrocities in the Middle East. Hopefully he will find a solution. Hopefully he will be able to convince Netanyahu from Israel and Hamas to stop fighting each other. Hopefully they will be able to release the hostages, and the hostages will be able to return safe to their home country and their family. Hopefully the atrocities will stop. We will see what happens. Anyway, Trump issued an ultimatum to Hamas right there, and hopefully Hamas hear it and release the hostages, and hopefully the atrocities stop and the war stops between Hamas and Israel. Let me know what you think about the situation right there. Do you think Trump is doing the right thing? Do you think he will be able to bring the hostages back? I truly hope so. Let's see what happens next. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you being here as always, and click right there to watch the next video, and I'll see you there. Bye bye.